What if the name of the new pope wasn't just a choice, but a prophetic message hidden in plain sight? What if Benedict XVI never spoke it? Not because he didn't know, but because he knew silence would one day speak louder than any voice. In this video, we will uncover the spiritual mystery behind the name Leo XIV, a name not heard for over 120 years, now spoken again at the heart of the Church. We'll connect the unshakable vision of Leo XIII, the sacred silence of Benedict XVI, and the quiet authority of Leo XIV, who may be heaven's response to a century of trial. This is not just a story, it's a prophetic unfolding, a message encoded in history, now revealed through the lens of silence, faith, and divine timing. And at the end of this video, we'll pray together a powerful prayer of protection and discernment, invoking heaven's help for the Church, for Pope Leo XIV, and for you and your loved ones. This video was made to bless your life and the lives of those you love. Tell us in the comments from which city you're watching. If this message stirs your soul, please like, subscribe, and share this video, because the silence of the saints is now speaking again. Welcome to El Silencio de Benedicto XVI. Let us begin. The crowd waited in breathless silence. St. Peter's Square, bathed in late afternoon light, held a sacred stillness as the new pope stepped onto the balcony. Cameras flashed, hearts pounded, and then came the name Leo XIV. For many, it was just a moment of joy. For others, something ancient stirred. It wasn't just a name, it was a declaration. Names carry weight in the Church. They echo through centuries, awaken memories, summon saints and spirits. When Robert Francis Prevost chose the name Leo, the echo wasn't faint. It was thunderous to those who had ears to hear. It wasn't nostalgia, it was continuity. It was a bridge between two storms. Few recognized the spiritual depth behind that moment. The world applauded. The cameras zoomed in, but beneath the surface, in the realm of the spirit, the earth trembled. This wasn't just a papal succession. This was a signal, the kind heaven sends in silence, and the Church, if attentive, would understand its urgency. There was something unmistakably bold in the choice. After 120 years of silence, the name Leo was revived. Not Benedict, not John Paul, not Pius, but Leo, a name tied to war, not of flesh, but of the spirit, a name once carried by the Pope who heard the devil speak. As the new Pope raised his hand in blessing, many saw humility, but others saw resolve. A quiet fire behind the eyes of a man who had walked in obscurity, now called to stand as a lion in a time of wolves. No coincidence, no politics. Something divine had unfolded on that balcony. It is in moments like these that the Church is called to remember that names are not chosen, they are whispered by eternity. And when Leo XIV looked upon the crowd, perhaps he too was hearing that whisper, a whisper that had echoed in another heart. Long before, a heart wrapped in white, watching from the cloisters of Mater Ecclesiae, a voice that had fallen silent, but whose silence still spoke. His name was Benedict, and what he did not say may now be roaring through the voice of Leo XIV. Benedict XVI never said who would follow him. Not once. Not in public, not in private letters, not even in carefully veiled theological hints. And yet, many began to suspect that he had already pointed the way, not with his voice, but with his silence. A silence that often speaks louder than 1,000 words. Those who read him closely, who lingered in his homilies and meditations, began to sense patterns, echoes, not predictions, but postures, gestures of the Spirit. In his final years, Benedict wrote and spoke often about purity of faith, spiritual warfare, the need for a return to God's truth. He never named a man, but he described a soul, and that soul matches closely the figure now seated on the chair of Peter. Robert Francis Prevost, now Leo XIII, is a man of inner discipline, of silence, of fidelity to truth. He's not loud, he's not political, he's not fashionable, but he is firm, and firm is the language heaven uses in times of confusion. Could it be that Benedict, knowing the weight of names, refused to name because heaven had already chosen? Could it be that his silence was not uncertainty, but surrender? A surrender that entrusted everything to God's hidden designs, to the unfolding of divine providence in the stillness of history. This is the mystery of spiritual discernment. The saints rarely point with their fingers. They point with their lives, with the way they suffer, with the way they disappear. Benedict disappeared, but not without leaving signs. His retirement was not a retreat, but a vigil, a long prayer in silence. And now that silence takes flesh again, not in the cloisters, but on the balcony, not behind the veil, but at the center of the world. Leo XIV is not simply a successor. He may be the very fulfillment of a silent prophecy, written not in ink, but in prayer. The Church is invited now to listen, to reread the silences of Benedict, to open his speeches, his letters, his prayers, and hear what was never said aloud, because perhaps what was never said was always meant to be lived. Before we can understand the thunder hidden in the name Leo XIV, we must look back more than a century to a man whose spiritual vision shook the heavens. Leo XIII, the Pope of the late 19th century, was no ordinary pontiff. He was a man of mystical depth, a man who, one day after Mass, stood frozen in awe. What he heard changed the course of the Church forever. According to those closest to him, Leo XIII had a terrifying vision, a conversation between Jesus and Satan. The evil one asked for time, power, and permission to destroy the Church. Christ, in sorrowful majesty, allowed it. 100 years, that was the time given, and Leo XIII trembled. He knew the battle had begun. Immediately after, he composed the now famous prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel, not as a devotion, but as a shield, a weapon, a prophetic act of protection for the Church he knew would suffer. The gates of hell would try to prevail, and only the armor of prayer and truth could resist. This moment is not folklore, it is legacy. And now, more than 120 years later, another pope dares to revive his name, Leo, not out of honor, but perhaps as a quiet trumpet blast in the realm of spirits. A name that calls the faithful not to comfort, but to combat. Not to fear, but to vigilance. If you're watching this video right now, take a pause, reflect. Do you feel it? That stirring in your soul when you hear the name Leo again? That's not coincidence. That's memory. That's the Spirit reminding the Church of its eternal battle. This video was made to bless your life and your family. Tell us in the comments from which city you're watching and write the word that best expresses your prayer today. Maybe faith or truth or simply silence. We invite you to subscribe to this channel if you believe the times we live in are not ordinary. If you feel, like many of us, that something has shifted and that the Holy Spirit is calling us to deeper vigilance. Because when Leo XIII saw what he saw, he didn't panic, he prayed. And when Leo XIV now walks in his shadow, he may not be repeating history, he may be fulfilling it. It was not a dream, it was not poetry. What Leo XIII experienced was a rupture, a piercing of the veil between heaven and earth. In that haunting moment after Mass, he saw the darkness not just as metaphor, but as reality. He heard Satan ask for a century, a time to test the Church, to sift it like wheat, and he saw Christ grant it. From that moment on, his papacy was marked by urgency, not panic, but purpose. Leo XIII understood that the Church had entered a century of trial, one that would be marked by war, heresy, secularism, and internal betrayal. His writings took on a new tone, firm, prophetic, protective. Like a shepherd preparing his flock for a storm he knew was coming. He turned to Saint Michael, the great Prince of Heaven, not simply as a symbol, but as a commander. The prayer he wrote became part of every Mass, a spiritual call to arms. He understood what few dared to, that the Church's true battle is never of flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. Now, more than 100 years later, many believe his vision has come to pass. The 20th century did not spare the Church. Wars, scandals, confusion, persecution. And as the 21st century unfolds, we see not an end, but an intensification. The smoke has entered the sanctuary. The battle is no longer outside, it is within. It is in this context that Leo XIV emerges, and the question burns in the hearts of the faithful. Is this man the spiritual heir of Leo XIII? Has the time of purification reached its climax? Was the revival of that name a divine reminder that the battle is not over and the Church must remain vigilant? This legacy is not academic, it is spiritual, and it is ours. Leo XIII left us not just prayers, but a posture, a readiness. He showed us how to kneel before God in a time of chaos, how to trust in the protection of the angels, how to walk into the dark, carrying only faith. And now Leo XIV may be the one called to carry that torch, not as a hero of history, but as a servant of providence. And we are called to pray, to fast, and to believe, because what was once seen in vision may now be walking among us. He could have chosen any name. He could have honored a saint, a mentor, a modern figure of mercy or reform. But he didn't. Robert Francis Prevost, a man of quiet strength and inner reserve, stepped into the spotlight of history and chose to be called Leo XIV, not out of sentiment, but perhaps out of a deeper obedience. This is no ordinary choice. After 120 years of papal history, no one had dared to carry the mantle of Leo XIII. The name had become sacred, sealed by prophecy, almost too heavy to wear. And yet, this humble man from the Americas reached back into that silence and spoke the name again. Was it coincidence, or was it something whispered in prayer? What we know of Prevost suggests depth. He has served in silence, worked in obscurity, led with quiet fidelity. He is not a pope of spectacle, but one of substance. And in times like these, substance is fire. Choosing Leo was not only an act of memory, it may have been a spiritual declaration of war, a signal to the heavens and to hell. The Church today is not merely in a crisis of structure, it is in a spiritual trial. A moment when confusion, compromise, and the collapse of truth swirl within its very heart. In this storm, Leo XIV steps forward, and his name says, "We remember. We remember the vision. We remember the battle, and we will not sleep." Could it be that this Pope sees what many do not, that beneath the scandals and politics lies a deeper struggle for the soul of the Church? Choosing the name Leo is like unsheathing a spiritual sword without saying a word. It is humility wrapped in fire, and if this is true, if this name was not chosen but received, then it calls us to attention. We, the faithful, must listen not to the headlines, but to the signs, to the whispers beneath the noise, to the Spirit speaking through names, through silences, through saints long gone. Because sometimes heaven doesn't need thunder to shake the earth. Sometimes it just needs one name spoken at the right time. Benedict XVI rarely spoke without purpose. Every word, every citation, every silence was theological. And among the many popes he referenced throughout his life, Leo XIII held a special place. To Benedict, Leo was not just a figure of the past, he was a beacon, a voice from another century, still echoing with clarity and courage. In his writings, Benedict often praised Leo XIII's theological depth, especially his efforts to reconcile faith and reason, to defend the Church from the currents of modernism, and to root the faithful in a spirituality that was both intellectual and mystical. He saw in Leo a bridge between the eternal truths and the struggles of the modern world. But more than admiration, there was alignment. Benedict shared Leo's concern for the erosion of truth. He echoed his warnings about relativism. He invoked the same sense of urgency, the same need to guard the sacred, and though he never named a successor, he left trails, paths of light, pointing to the kind of shepherd the Church would need. When Benedict stepped down, he didn't endorse a man, he didn't speak names, but he did speak principles. He reminded the Church of the importance of fidelity, of silence, of liturgy, of obedience to truth. And in doing so, he may have been quietly laying the groundwork for someone who would later walk in the spirit of Leo XIII. Leo XIV, emerging from the same soil of spiritual integrity, now stands as a possible fulfillment of that silent preparation. He is not a copy, but perhaps a continuation, a soul chosen not by popularity, but by providence. And Benedict may have known this all along. In the twilight of his life, Benedict began to disappear, but his silence was never empty. It was filled with memory and with hope, and perhaps behind the walls of Mater Ecclesiae, the old Pope prayed not for a successor in name, but for one in spirit. Leo XXX once saw the devil approach. Benedict saw the same shadows. Now, Leo XIV may be the one called to stand in that breach. Not by chance, but because two great men before him had already opened the path, in faith, in silence, and in sacrifice. From the very first blessing he gave, Leo XIV carried something in his gaze, not the weight of novelty, but the gravity of continuity. He looked not to impress, but to anchor. And in a world adrift in confusion, that is already a sign of resistance. But the question remains, is he the Pope of the sword or the Pope of the balm? In the Church's history, some popes are reformers, others are defenders. Some rebuild what has been torn, others protect what is under siege. But rarely does one man do both. And yet, Leo XIV stands now at a threshold where the Church seems to require both, the courage to fight and the mercy to restore. He is not a loud man. He does not storm the world with declarations. But silence, as Benedict XVI taught us, is not weakness. Silence can be armor. Silence can be a shield against the noise of deception. And Leo XIV's silence, like that of his predecessors, seems filled with discernment, not distance. The Church he inherits is tired, wounded, divided. Many have lost their trust in leadership. Many more have drifted away. And yet, he chooses to wear the name Leo, a lion, not to intimidate, but to guard, to remind the world that there is still something worth protecting, something sacred, something eternal. In this time of fracture, the Pope must hold together two worlds, tradition and renewal, justice and mercy, truth and love. It is a tension that only the Spirit can navigate. And Leo XIV, by invoking the legacy of Leo XIII, steps into that tension with both humility and fire. Perhaps he is called to be a combatant, not against people, but against falsehood, not with words alone, but with example. Or perhaps he is the one who will rebuild altars that have been abandoned, reignite candles that have been extinguished, restore trust where it has been lost. Whatever his path, one thing is clear: Leo XIV does not walk alone. He walks with the memory of Leo XIII. He walks with the silence of Benedict XVI. And most of all, he walks with the Spirit, that same Spirit who, through the storms of history, still guards the bride of Christ. There are names that vanish into history, and names that wait in silence until their time returns. For more than a century, no pope dared to speak the name Leo again. Not since Leo III, whose very vision seemed to split time in two. Why the long silence? Why now? Some say it was coincidence, others say reverence, but perhaps, just perhaps, Heaven was waiting, waiting for the right hour, the right man, the right storm, because the name Leo carries with it not only memory, but mission. And mission in the Church is never random. From 1903 to today, we've seen popes of peace, of reform, of evangelization. But Leo III was different. He looked the devil in the eye. He wrote encyclicals with fire. He prayed like a soldier. And for 120 years, no one took up that mantle. Until now. In biblical terms, 120 years is significant. It echoes Noah. It echoes the long preparation before the flood, the spiritual flood. Could it be that the Church has now reached the moment for which the name Leo was preserved, a moment not of nostalgia, but of prophetic confrontation? When Leo XIV chose his name, he did not just honor a past, he reawakened a time. He stepped into a silence that had been guarded, not forgotten by his predecessors. And in doing so, he sent a message, not just to the faithful, but to the heavens and to the darkness beneath. This act may seem small to the world, but to those who watch the Church with eyes of the Spirit, it is monumental. It is a sign that the long silence is over, that something ancient, something holy has returned, not to repeat history, but to fulfill it. And now, that name, Leo, rings once more from the heights of St. Peter's, a name buried in prophecy, awakened in crisis, and destined perhaps to guide the Church through the fire, with courage carved from silence. Some names are like doors. They open one era and close another. Others are bridges laid across centuries, meant to connect moments of divine urgency. Leo XIII stood at the threshold of the 20th century, warning of storms. Leo XIV now rises at the threshold of the 21st, not by accident, but by providence. In the final years of the 1800s, Leo XIII foresaw a world drifting from God. He spoke of science unmoored from faith, politics severed from virtue, and a culture forgetting the sacred. He did not tremble. He taught. He prayed. He warned. His was a voice of clarity in an age of confusion. Now, Leo XIV emerges in an eerily similar moment. The world again trembles. Truth is again blurred. The Church again finds herself wounded, not only by external enemies, but by internal fatigue, division, and betrayal. The cry for clarity is rising, and again a Leo stands to speak. The name itself becomes a prophetic hinge. It reminds the Church that history is not linear. It is sacramental. God writes through time with echoes, with repetitions that are not circles, but spirals. What was once spoken returns, fuller, deeper. Not because God repeats himself, but because we must hear it again. Leo XIV is not Leo XIII, but the echo is unmistakable. The same spiritual hunger, the same sense of confrontation, the same call to trust the invisible over the popular, to lean into truth, even when truth is heavy, to guard the deposit of faith, even when the world mocks it. This bridge is not just for scholars or historians. It is for you, the viewer, the believer, the one watching this now, feeling the urgency in your spirit. You are not imagining it. Something ancient is rising again because the time has come to remember and to prepare. And so, between two Leos, a path reopens. A path of battle, yes, but also a path of hope. Because if God raised up a Leo in the 19th century to protect his Church, perhaps he has done so again now, not to repeat the war, but to bring the victory closer. He never said his name. Benedict XVI, in all his wisdom, never pointed publicly to a man. But he did something more powerful. He pointed to a need, a shape, a silence. And in that silence, the Spirit began to work, slowly, invisibly, until now, when a voice rises again, and that voice carries the name Leo XIV. Many wondered why Benedict remained so quiet in his final years, why he retreated, why he did not comment on the direction of the Church, even when storms roared. But silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it is the deepest act of trust, a silence so full of faith that it becomes prophecy. Through his prayers, his writings, his very stillness, Benedict may have been preparing a space, a sacred clearing in the wilderness, for someone else to step forward. Not to be his echo, but to carry forward what he once guarded. Not to continue his papacy, but to fulfill its longing. Leo XIV now walks into that sacred space, and he does not come speaking of novelty or change. He comes with reverence, with fire wrapped in gentleness, with memory stitched into his name, and the silence that once spoke only in cloistered rooms now speaks from the balcony of St. Peter's. We must not be deaf to this moment. The name Leo was not spoken lightly. The timing was not accidental. The silence of Benedict XVI was not a void, it was a waiting. And what we now see may be the answer to his final prayer, that the Church be shepherded by one who knows the weight of the cross and the hope of resurrection. Leo XIV is not just a pope, he is a sign that God is not absent, that heaven still watches, that the Church, though wounded, is not abandoned, and that the silence of saints still thunders across time when the moment is right. And so what Benedict never said now lives. And perhaps, if we listen with the ears of the soul, we will hear it too, not in speeches but in grace, not in declarations, but in the quiet courage of a man chosen by God to stand as a lion in the time of wolves. There are moments in history when God speaks not through thunder, but through a whisper, not through declarations, but through names, not through noise, but through silence. And in the quiet heart of Benedict XVI, that silence waited. Until now, when the name Leo XIV was spoken before the world, not as a novelty, but as a prophecy fulfilled. This is not about politics. It is not about power. It is about presence, the divine presence that guides the Church even when we cannot see it, even when we are tired, even when we are afraid. The name of Leo XIII reminds us that heaven still acts, that the Spirit still calls, and that God has not stopped writing his story through his Church. Let us then close not with commentary but with prayer, a prayer born from faith, from hope, and from the silence that now roars again. Prayer of benediction. Lord Jesus Christ, you who never abandon your Church, even in her darkest nights, we thank you for the silence of the saints and the voice you raise through your chosen ones. Send your Spirit upon Pope Leo XIV. Strengthen him with the courage of lions and the humility of the Lamb. Let him guard the faith with fire and love, and guide us through the storm with your light. May we, your people, remain faithful in the trial, vigilant in prayer, and rooted in truth. For you are with us. You are the shepherd, and you are the final word. Amen. If this message touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below with the word silence if you feel that God still speaks in the stillness. And share this video with someone who needs hope, because prophecy does not end. It continues through us. May God bless you and your family, and may the Lion of Judah always defend his Church.